You are listening to the Merchant Meetings podcast. Join us as we share the insights, successes, and failures that we and others have experienced in the small business space.
Will, thank you very much for jumping on. So, Primabolics, a relatively small brand when it started, and now it is nationwide, just like T said. Could you kind of give us a picture of how Primabolics started and what I guess you looked like at that stage in your life, and just give us a picture of how far it's now sort of gone, and I guess just a brief sort of history.
1,000%. So it was 2015 when it all began. So it's going on 8 years next month. It was August. I, at the time, was an environmental scientist back then in mining, doing quite remote sort of environmental studies on groundwater or surface water or noise control, dust control, doing all these sort of preliminary studies before mines would go into areas. So I'd go to very remote places they were planning on putting mines, and they'd put me out there in the middle of nowhere for a few weeks. But in the background, had always been training was the thing I'd go home and do at the end of the day. And a lot of these things were very remote, very harsh. A lot of it was quite central Australia or quite a few hundred k's inland, and they were pretty harsh environments that you worked solo. And I suppose it taught me a fair few very, very good skills. But the thing I actually looked forward to at the end of the day was very much the training. I love training at that time. And I suppose at that age, being around the 24, 25 mark, I was really, really heavily into bodybuilding. I'd started competing in natural bodybuilding around 22, 23, really loved it. And I suppose I was lucky that the person who got me interested in weights, he pretty much from day one, he was a bodybuilder himself, so he started introducing me to supplements straight away. And so they'd been there from the start, whereas I think a lot of people probably start training and then they might come in later and they might just get exposed to a protein powder here and there or something. But from the beginning, this guy was interested too. So it was straight away, it was everything from pre-workouts, creatine, early stuff back then, it was BCAAs and that sort of thing. So in the background, but whilst doing this quite remote work, drive in, drive out stuff, working long hours and doing that, and then working on active mine sites. And I think in the background was always this love and this interest. And so I'd finish my day, go train, then I'd read about these things. I'm like, well, what was it that it's like, wow, that really, really, really slapped then. What was that? What really booted me there? And you'd read through and you go, oh, okay, what's this thing? Oh, amino acids. And this was back when the market was very heavily based on American subs that were very marketed, but not very clinically dosed. It was a big marketing budget, not a lot of formulation budget. It was the way that the shelves were looking. And there wasn't even really Aussie-made brands going back nearly 10 years ago. It was just all imported stuff with from big companies who had sponsored the pro bodybuilders at the time. And that was about it. Like Facebook barely existed, So I found there's a big lack in the current sort of space of what I was using. I started having to build my own. So I'd buy straight amino acids or straight herbs or straight raws. And in the background of all of that, I suppose I was not exactly genetically gifted, whereas my two brothers were classic ectomorphs, real hard gainers, guys who were just born with abs, right? And I was the endomorphic middle one, which is really intriguing because if you've got one person out of three siblings with same nature, same nurture, same diet, same environment, grew up on the same farm with the same food, how on earth does it show up so differently? How do you have two of the three who present they eat KFC and lose weight, and then there's the opposite with me? I was about 100 kilos at 11, so I was massively overweight, right? Like I was a really, really big kid, and so I've got in the background of all this stuff, I'm sort of way down the track. I'm training, doing all these things, but from a very early age, I was interested. I'm like, how can this be explained? Why can there be a big physiological difference? Someone who's eating the same, doing the same, lives in the same environment, same everything input is identical, going to the same school, same like everything, right? Lifestyle, all of it. And so that got me fast, and that started really getting me to tinker with things. Whilst I was tinkering with pre-workouts and performance things down here, I was also looking upstream of that, and that was hormones initially. That was looking at what was it, and for me, it went right down to even trying to do like basal body temperature charts and looking at thyroid stuff and getting really interested in how metabolism works. Because I'm like, well, metabolism is why my body distributes body fat differently. Metabolism is the interesting thing, and I'd read about that. So by the time I started going down all these rabbit holes, and this all kept playing out, by the time I'd sort of gotten to that 2015 point where I decided to pull the trigger, I'd already probably for 4 or 5 years been just reading ravenously, consuming at that point more papers. There wasn't really as many podcasts on this sort of stuff back then. Supplements were in the dark ages, a lot of the things 10 years ago. So there wasn't a huge amount of resources. So I just started reading medical journals and studies, because that was all I knew from uni. Was like, well, this is how you learn a topic. You go through the peer-reviewed studies and meta-analysis and you pull it apart. And so I started learning it and just approached it as if I was doing a degree and just went through everything. And so I could apply. I came from a bit differently though. So coming from that overweight, non-sporty teenage background type thing into the space a bit later on, going down the bodybuilding road, I guess I hadn't really come at it, and not being part of the industry at all. At this point, the whole career had been entirely apart from it. I'd been in the army for 4 years, mining. I've been in hospitality. I've been in like everything, but I worked in government. I was a geologist for a period. I've done everything, but I hadn't done supplements at all. I didn't even know this was an industry. So I walked into it with zero prior knowledge of what is accepted as the norm. And I just formulated how I should do it. Right. And so all my early sort of stuff led me to make my own raws, my own herbs, buy them all just from different countries or places where I could get them, and start building my own little, concoctions, I guess. And the way the whole thing started was I got sick of just putting all these things together, because I was getting jack of buying 8 or 10 different bags and having all these just white powders everywhere, and it all tasted like garbage because it's unflavored, and it was just not a nice experience. So but I couldn't buy anything on the shelves. I was like, well, I've got no alternative yet. Mm-hmm. And so what I did is I went to one of the stores that I bought all these separate raws from. And I was like, well, can you just put these in a tub for me? Or could you just, do some of the pre-packaged thing each month for me, mix them all? And they threw it in a tub. And I suppose like just basically the guy was a bit of a tinkerer himself. So he just started putting together, pre-mixing some into tubs and just threw in like a generic light, given grape flavor. It was pineapple. And
this was at the retail level someone was doing this?
Yeah, this was the store. So it was a complete fluke way back when. And it just turned out they knew someone who knew someone, right? And so they just knew someone who had a very small factory blending operation. And so they just, and I had no idea this was even a thing at this point. I'm like, I didn't even know any of it yet. I was just a kid, hadn't worked in it, didn't even knew there was a career in this, none of it. Went, well, could you just put it in a tub, right? And it came back, and I didn't even know he knew someone who could blend. Came back and said, oh, I'll try this one out. I was like, oh, and I tried it, and I started giving it to some friends, and they were like, it rocked them, because they were like, well, I've never had anything that's actually dosed.
Dosed correctly.
It dosed correctly. So when they trained it, they're like, holy shit, this thing actually works. Like, wow, I get like the pump, because everything they'd bought was this American stuff and the stuff that was really underdosed. And so when you gave them something that was dosed 3, 4, 5, 6 times heavier in most of the active ingredients and everything they'd used, they actually got the things the tubs would say it would do. And I thought, I'll get 5 or 6 of them and just give it out in Ziploc bags and show mates. And this was like, I guess my old man, he's a whip maker. He grew up on he's always had his own business. So I had that in the background looking at it. So I had a parent figure who had run their own business, but his whole life worked on his own terms. But this was all just
new,
forming early pieces. And I got all these raws, put them together. So, and I thought, well, once I started giving it to friends in these Ziploc bags and literally snail mailing it to them, like putting it in the post with a stamp and like literally mailing it to people, because again, Facebook was very early, so that was all we had. And I'd message out and say, hey guys, who would like to try something? Put it on there, and then I'd get some people say me, and I was like, oh, what's your address? I'll post it to you in an envelope and write a little letter and see if you want to try it and so on. And sure enough, they would like it. They go, oh, could I get a tub? I was like, fuck, I don't know. I've just given you samples from mine, but sure, I'll ask for 2 or 3 tubs instead of 1 then. And so a friend of the friend goes, all right, cool, here's a batch. And I'd buy 5 and, sell them to friends. And then that would give me enough to buy, say, 10 tubs, and I'd buy 10 and keep going. And after a while, I started going, shit, there's something here in this. Like, there's some pretty cool feedback in this. And me being the hardcore bodybuilder at that age, I called it a bleed out was the idea. The branding was very different to now. It was a very hardcore branding, right? And I literally wrote the tubs in pen. So I just had a white blank tub, and I wrote on a Sharpie just saying pre-workout by Will Warren Davey. That was literally, and I sold each tub that way. For the first 50 or so tubs I sold, just written in pen. So
this might sound crazy for anyone that's buying supplements now, but back in the day, it was very bodybuilding focused, and anything that actually kind of looked a little bit more grey, it might have actually attracted people. I know that people look at supplements very differently now, but that's a very unique approach. And so just to frame that up, you're essentially saying that you had a science sort of background, and because of that background, you'd obviously done a degree, you'd written papers, you'd referred to medical journals, and coming into that bodybuilding space, that was sort of a skill that you took over into the bodybuilding space, even though it was just a hobby. And that's where you started to see some, I guess, of the inconsistencies in the industry, which would present an opportunity.
Bingo.
And so not in anywhere near as an impressive way, but when we went over into the barber space, we often saw things that we were like, oh, like this is how it's being done, and we really don't think that's a great way of doing it. And so often when you come from one industry and move into another, the fresh pair of eyes, you're seeing so many opportunities because you haven't got that sort of concreted way of thinking about things.
1,000%.
And so that's super interesting. So at this point in time, the industry is very bodybuilding sort of focused. If you're a jack dude, we'll accept what you've got to say.
Yep.
But you're essentially a science kid coming in and taking a really different approach to things, although you had a huge interest in bodybuilding. And so now you've started to formulate some of your own products. I guess sort of mass production isn't something that you're thinking about now. You're just thinking about the next 10 tubs.
I had a tinkering. I had a play here. So the mass production concept came in because I started getting a little bit of glimpses here, and there were some stores around that had been like independently owned supplement stores that I'd shopped at because mates of mine who I'd trained around had started their own businesses, say, or they'd gone out and had a crack. And again, this was like entrepreneurial stuff now, business ownership now is a trendy thing. Back then it was like you're a flunky, you're a loser. If you go out, do a steady job, go to school, go to uni, get the house with the white picket fence, have a kid, you're done, right? That was like, and usually that was all done by the age of like 22 at my hometown. I was in a small country town. So like most of that stuff was the prerequisite. You don't leave steady income. You don't go out and pursue something that's turbulent and choose up all your savings and has no return or guaranteed income. Like it was just frowned on, right? Parents think you're crazy, friends think you're crazy. You're just that weird, unstable person for a long time who has no steady money. It was a really weird
dreamer. It
was a dreamer, right? And in an era where that was not encouraged. And I think that's probably one positive of socials and platforms and podcasting now is that people are getting glimpses of this stuff on a bigger scale. But prior, that wasn't the case. So it took me a long time to build up the courage to even think a little bit further afield than doing the handwritten tubs with pen and so on. But I thought, by the way that people were starting to give me feedback, and some of these stores that friends of mine owned, the feedback was starting to get quite promising. I thought, what does it look like? So I sort of went down and said, all right, well, who's your friend of a friend then? Who's this factory and what can I do? And they had a minimum run of 1,000 units, which is quite big actually for a small player. That I was obviously being played at that age. Now looking back, I went out and did this. Okay, so what does that cost? At the time, it was like 26 grand, and I was on about 40 grand a year at the time because I had taken a bit of a plunge at this point. I was on and off, I suppose, with the mining background because I graduated into a downturn. So there was boom and bust in mining. It's very up and down. When it's on, everyone gets paid. Everyone has great jobs. It's sick. When it's off, people really casualize the workforce, put into contractor styles, and you have secondments basically where you might work 3-month block here, 6-month block there. It's very piecemeal stuff. And on the last time I got made redundant, I'd gotten really, really jack of this, and I was just like, this is rubbish. And I'd started, these powders were starting to get some good feedback. I was starting to go, there's something here. A friend of mine's own stores, they're starting to say, hey, the samples you give me are pretty damn good. This is something. So I spoke to that factory. I went, well, what's this minimum, that 26K? But again, at the time, being on 40 odd grand a year, that was huge. Half my annual income, so in one go. And I wasn't someone who had a particularly steady career progression to this point because it was so on and off. So that wasn't it was a real effort to get that loan. I'd lie to the bank and say I was trying to buy a car for him to give him that money. And so I took this out, got the 1,000 units and went, let's have a plunge, right? And this was the very sort of early remnants of products there with the hardcore branded, literally like the wording written in blood on the tub, like a really just like grungy, early, high stim, heavy bodybuilding focused product, right? And got it there, started asking mates, hey, would you actually put this on your shelves? Is this a thing? And they obliged. They went,
this
okay.
was prior to the order though. You were getting a feedback of
Oh
potential
no, I'm
orders.
Somewhat of a psychopath. I just committed to that point. I got it first and asked later. I went in. I went, fuck, I'll take a plunge.
Because I didn't want to jump over that because you said, I decided to take the plunge. Like you put the order through and thought, I'll make it work regardless.
Yeah, money up front, ask questions later.
And would that have come from your parents being in business? You saw these risks being taken, or you were like, well, I've got an unstable job. What's more unstable?
Yeah, I reflected this later on because I've been broke for a huge portion of my life, and I think it's been a really big blessing because when I have a very big appetite for risk, largely because for almost all of my early years, I didn't have anything to lose, which is exceptionally powerful. If you've like, all my friends have been by that age, in their mid-20s, they already had full-time jobs for a few years, left school, set up, starting to have houses, settle down, have kids, and there was much more on the line, right? Whereas I'd sort of thrown myself into this very chaotic on and off style work in remote areas, doing all these things. I was used to stuff being up in the air. I was used to getting a call that morning, hey mate, contract's done, you finished work. Wow. No severance pay, nothing because you're casual, you're just done. Rock up to work, you're done, mate. See ya. And be dismissed on the spot. So that had happened 3 times consecutively over 18 months. And I was like, so I was pretty used to stuff being up in the air. I haven't really known much stability historically. And so that was the background. Standard. It was normal. I was like, I'll take a punt. It'll likely blow up, but what am I going to lose? So I took a punt, got it, and thankfully the stores agreed. Thank Christ. Again, in retrospect, yes, Steve, you would ask first if I were to do that again.
Otherwise, you're going to need to make 1,000 friends real quick.
Proof of concept. That's a lot of Ziploc bags, man. That's a lot. So these sort of stores start taking on. Now, interestingly enough, that stuff then, within 2 to 3 weeks, unfortunately, because the small scale blending in Australia wasn't what it is now. There's an industry now, Australian brands now, really prominent. We've really upskilled our manufacturing sector to match the marketplace. Back then, though, it was not the same animal. So unfortunately, those 1,000 units within about 3 weeks started going hard. They started clumping.
Ooh.
So we had lost it. They weren't shelf stable essentially. So,
Ooh.
and at the time I didn't know. Looking at ingredients that you wouldn't put together now, looking back then, essentially there's some stability. You can have the wish list based on data and studies and dosages and what you'd like to have as active ingredients in a given product, but
the synergism can be different.
Synergism can be different, whether they're hydroscopic, whether they attract water, whether they clump, whether they're shelf stable, whether they interact with other ingredients too. All this stuff I had no clue because this was all new to me, right? So I all 1,000 units went to bricks.
Wow.
And I thought, well, surely the manufacturer will cover this. This is a warranty job. Easy,
Nope.
I'll send it back. Nope, wash the hands of it. So here I was at this age just going, well, I've just wiped off half my yearly income. I've got a loan here. I only finished paying that off about 2 years ago. And I'm going, well, shit, I've got a garage full of bricks. This is great. And I was just doing this out of my apartment at the time. And, it was just hand delivering tubs locally. There was no anything, no e-commerce, no website. Back then, that was really unusual to have someone build their own website. Like that was really unheard of back then, like 10 years ago, in tech, right? So I suppose I was just literally hand delivering stuff on weekends to stores. And I had since then, I guess, in this time frame, since I'd been working around supplement stores a bit and realizing that's actually a career, because again, not coming from this space, I didn't know these were even a job you could have. So I went, oh, well, what's it look like to work in one of these things? And there was a job ad came up, the last time I got made redundant, a job ad came up for Nutrition Warehouse at Katara in Newcastle there.
Yep.
I went, well, this is interesting. I didn't even know you could do this. So I went in for the interview and I just really would love to. I thought I'd just laid it all on the line. I'm like, I'd just fucking love to do this. I didn't even think this was a job. If you don't have to pay me to do this, I'd just love to do it. Just put me on and I'll have a go.
Yeah.
And that store grew from doing about 30 grand a month to about 96 a month within 6 months of me on there. I had no I was just having a go, right? And so I knew I had a bit of an affinity for selling supplements, and I'd worked with the biggest retailer in the country now and seen what stores do and how many units they can move and how many brands come in and what they're like. And again, the caliber of formulations had not caught up yet. The market was still well behind, so I guess the products have been clumping slowly in the background. I'd since transitioned to work into retail in the industry that I was keen on and starting to get a feel for, well, actually there is something here. This can be much bigger scale. This can be big if you do it right. Yeah. And I guess I started sort of tinkering around with the idea of going, well, what would it look like if I had a second crack at this? And I don't know why I did, but I thought, well, let's roll the dice again. And working there, I got to this awkward point where I decided I made in retrospect, good decision. I thought I'd bow out early and I resigned because it became a bit of a conflict of interest over a few months of me sort of in the meantime garnering some attention from the local stores and selling product and doing promos. I was managing a store Monday to Friday, then on the weekend going down and doing a booth at my local store doing taste testings, and it was literally just me on a card table with with a little sign that I printed off and laminated saying, yeah, try my pre and zip-locking it and so on. So it was like that, but still in my mind I was like, well, I'm trying to get sales for my competitors on a weekend whilst, my main job should be trying to grow this store. This time it's getting a bit blurry. I'm supporting my competitors whilst also trying to grow my own ship.
And that was an internal thing that you were feeling, which was leading you to a decision, not someone top down.
No,
being
no,
like,
no
hey,
one
what's
was.
this guy doing?
No one had really cared so much because it was still quite small. It was a tiny operation. Yeah, it was just me hand delivering, like dropping stuff off by hand, doing all this stuff on weekends in my own time. Like it was so basement era still. So it wasn't like up top was, but I don't know. I've got a bit of a moral compass with this stuff, and I think that's probably one of the few things that I try and retain throughout business and life is to have integrity tends to be your main cornerstone of decision making, right? So I reached out to Grant and said, hey mate, I'm gonna tap it there because I think this might get murky if I keep going, and he respected it a lot, and he said, mate, actually I'll give you a crack. As a thank you for that, because that's an honourable thing to do. I'll actually put you on the website as a thanks. And this is
as a stock list.
Yeah, as a stock list. So he put me on discretionarily on the website because
but was also happy for you to leave.
Yeah.
So didn't say, no, mate, stay. Like you've taken my store from 30 to 90.
Well,
we're good.
He wasn't happy about that part. He wasn't, and it was funny because I got him on my podcast and interviewed him recently. It was a really nice, like full circle moment to interview your previous interviewer. It was really cool. Cool. And it was nice off air asking him some questions about when I left at that time and all that sort of jazz. And it was funny. He didn't, obviously you don't want your manager doing a good job to leave at any given time, but he did appreciate that I want to have a crack. And he himself started out of Newcastle trying to build a business from nothing, fumbled around and failed for 20 odd years before it got to the peak that it is now. Like, he had a very turbulent career as well, getting to the top. So I think he had a bit of a soft spot for the underdog story, something I've adopted since. and he, I guess, just gave me his blessing and a pat on the back sort of thing, saying, all right, mate, have a crack at it, and put it on the website. Now, the good thing working there, I knew that would also allow it to be stocked in stores if it's in the system. And I started going around the local stores and I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to have a crack at this, what does it look like? And I started formulating something new. I was like, well, this won't work and this factory won't work. And for some reason, I got in my head, I need to, I had a friend of a friend reach out through Aussie Muscle Asylum. Actually, it was a big forum at the time, very bodybuilding. Very bodybuilding focused, right? So I put in a post there, and I was actually asking a question about different like substrates of fuel we use when we're training at different intensities. I was just geeking out on there, and this guy just messaged me. He's like, "Mate, what do you do?" And I sort of told him what I'm trying to do, and he's like, "Man, I reckon I could do something for you." And this guy was the current national sales manager for Platinum Labs here. So who used to make Pathogen, used to do OptiBurn, DEFCON as well. I've seen it at
Blacktown store.
Yeah, I remember it on your shelves, 100%. And Pathogen still sort of makes reoccurrences here and there. It was one of the highest stim things in the game.
I think they made their way into NS, which is probably the biggest distributor in Australia as well. So they definitely put some runs on the board.
Oh, they did. And he was working with Nutrition Systems thereafter. He was a really big thing. And he went, like, actually, we manufacture in the US. He goes, would you like an introduction to the factory? I went, this is the big time. I'm in the Nutrition Warehouse website. I can reach out over here, and I've got a US factory that people actually respect here because, again, Aussie was mud back then. And now, as far as I was concerned, it was too, because if I tried to manufacture here to support local, and it just cooked me, right? So I was like, well, all right, sweet, let's have a go.
Yeah, that's a really important point just for anyone listening as well, because where the Australian dollar would have been around that time, it meant that it was actually really profitable to try and manufacture from the US. Because I remember going to Duracap at the time and getting a product made, and it was the labor rates that were cheaper over there, the raw materials that were cheaper. The shipping actually wasn't that crazy when, like, your landed product was certainly cheaper than if you tried to make it in Australia. So for him to get a US hookup potentially, this was like, okay, we're about to hit the money here.
We're on, and we've got some margins, and I can see scalability, and I can see flavoring was just next level compared to anything we could get here. Like, this was like,
that was a big thing. Yeah.
Flavoring was amazing, right? And I was like, wow, this is, because my stuff till now was sort of, bodybuilders were almost at the time, a high stim pre, they're like, we expect it to taste like dirt, but if it works, we don't care, because that's the consumer. But there'd been this shift, and particularly working at Nutrition Warehouse, they were very much more Gen Pop focused. They were after the everyday mums and dads and the people who go for a walk in the morning and take a fat burner before it. Like, they weren't after the hardcore people. And I started seeing the people who walk through my doors, and thousands of customers a month were going through those doors by that point, were not who I thought was the game. And then I started sort of piecing all these things together. And then I realized in the back end, after doing all those years of sort of looking at hormones and looking at my own genetic makeup and what was influencing stuff, I realized that what I thought was actually the big thing in bodybuilding, which performance and stims and energy and just trying to hit training and protein synthesis, that's all irrelevant. It's all downstream of what the hormones do, right? Like testosterone, cortisol, how your thyroid functions, like that's the upstream stuff that dictates calories in, calories out. It dictates your basal metabolic function. It dictates how your biology responds to stimulus or stress or recovering. Everything happens because of where your hormones are, where they're at, right? Like suboptimal testosterone can really, really directly impact ability to do anything body composition wise, regardless of how clean, diet, training, otherwise, all those inputs are in. So I started looking, I suppose, piecing all this together. Then NW, I saw customers come in that were just everyday people, not the bodybuilders I thought was the only market. So it all twigged, and I started going, well, what if I did this like how I actually would, and put my own little spin on it, and then made products that were more that way. And I sort of blended I sort of put a bit of a blend of like how the naturopaths approach stuff with the herbals and botanicals and adaptogens. And I started playing with how the sports guys do it though, and putting in your amino acids and active and so on, and trying to and then I went, well, yeah, but you also need vitamins and minerals, and you need micronutrients as cofactors. And I put them all three together, and I suppose it's a bit of a different way of doing things, but it made for some really unique products. Like my early things, grind was definitely one of them, my non-stim pre-workout, because I was massive on coming from a shift working background and mining myself. I was acutely aware of cortisol from a very early age and how big stress impacted. The more I read about hormones, the more I realized stress impacted all of them. And then I actually made a non-stim fat burner called Lipoline, and this thing was really unique. It was curcumin. It was some uncoupling stuff as well back there with calcium pyruvate as well. It was a really, really unique formula, right? And white button mushroom as well, and kidney bean extract as well for and chlorogenic acid, and playing with carb shuttling, and really, really, really interesting sort of way of doing it with like uncoupling, blocking absorption of carbohydrates with the really, really just left of field though, right? And because it was heavy, like had 500 milligrams of curcumin, like turmeric extract per serve, it was like bright fluorescent yellow and tasted a certain way. So it was a really unique thing that did what it said it would do, but it was quite radically different in the market. Let me know it.
Yeah. So, and just for anyone that's listening that doesn't, I guess, understand some of the ingredients that he's mentioning, he really is talking about turmeric, like extract, and putting that in a fat burner. And there is no way that you would put that in a fat burner because it's certainly not helping taste. But the actual clinical data on it is next to amazing. And so it would absolutely help regulate blood sugar, which could be one of the best things for mass market. But one of the things that I assume you're about to come to is just because it's a good product, just because it's a good idea, if the market's not ready for it, it doesn't mean there's dollars attached to the idea in the early stages.
Oh no. And this is what, if I thought 20 grand was a problem, then this was about to just put me in my seat, because what I did next was even dumber. This is going to make that look like a really, really pale story. After seeing what NW would do on a scale, because back then it was 60 stores, I thought, well, after getting some runs on the board with the stores, somehow, because I still had held good favour with people internally and I'd become good mates with people who are in procurement and so on there, I sort of sat down with them and said, look, can you give me a shot at planogram? Not planogram, sorry, at the gondola specials. At the end of all their shelves in all 60 stores around the country, they have a bay there, and you walk in, there's a monthly special, right? And you walk in there, and each month they put in suppliers bid for these spots. And I knew that working there, and this was like the prime spot. You walk in, it's the first thing you see in 60 stores around the country. It was a big.
And
big
so you were in all 60 stores at this point in time?
No, God, no. I was still discretionary and probably in a handful, but just because I had some good graces still from the way I conducted myself, and I'd maintained contact afterwards with some key people in the company, just as mates more than anything.
Yep.
And started getting some half decent sort of runs on the board with the stores I did work with, because I really I was all in on this passion project. I was going above and beyond with these stores to do everything I could, go and educate the stores, managers, tell them how every single ingredient worked, gave them tubs themselves, really went
grassroots stuff,
stuff, right? And stuff I was doing this morning before this podcast. It always works. And I suppose they went, all right, well, let's give you a crack at it. But what would you do? It has to be aggressive. No one knows your brand. You're brand new, mate. Like if you want to play with the big boys, you've got to do something pretty aggressive.
And so Bleed Out was the only product you had at this point in time, which was stocked in NW. This was your second product.
Yes, so that thing had clumped, shut it down. I went, okay,
Bleed Out was out.
It was done.
It bled out.
No, it bled out. It did, literally. Went very, very hard. And I went, okay, well, you're done. Rigor mortis set in. And then the rest of I suppose, in the meantime, like I said, sort of gotten this awareness of the market being more generalised. And so I started tweaking around with the rebrand concept and trying to bring out some more, I suppose, Gen Pop friendly, less hardcore, but still with an edge. Still much more hardcore in my current packaging, but more middle ground and sort of geared towards everyone. But it was still a pre-workout product because, again, I was still very in the trenches of performance with training, and I was competing still at the time. And so
you do feel pre-workouts, which is a very unique thing compared to protein.
And just from sales data I'd seen at that point, because now I had a bit of time in stores, I'd really just seen that. I saw percentage of sales wise that category was the
growing. Yep.
If I was going to take off if I was going to do something, do that. And so I said, all right, well, give me a spot, but I had to be very aggressive. So what he got me to agree to was I'd do a free 30 serve BCA product. Back then it was a BCA. The Intra, you guys saw quite a lot of that actually, the green label. So that product came out as basically a giveaway, and they got me to agree to do basically a full 49 retail product as a giveaway. I'd credit them for every store, and there was 6 per store, so it was 360 units up front as free, and everything that would sell throughout Gondola would be free on the amino acid bar, and then credit the pre-workout up front too for all 3 sites, so all 60 sites. So again, so it's like 6 and 6, all free on all 60 sites up front. So to get the amount of stock I had to write off in advance to do this.
Sorry, say it again. They bought 6 pre-workouts, got 6 free pre-workouts and 6 free amino acids?
Well, it was essentially all of it was free at the start. So they didn't even buy anything until so this is how dumb I was. But at the time, I thought this was my shot at the big time. Like, this is cracker, right? I've got a gondola end special in the biggest retail in the country. So I'm like, I'll do anything I need to get in. Because I thought in my mind, if I'm in this massive chain, I will crank and it's worth whatever it's worth. I'll just make it happen. So...
And I would actually agree with that thought pattern. So this is probably where the entrepreneurs will separate from the business owners, because the business owner is going to look at that and say, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to be in business by doing things like this. But the chance at being a part of a major retailer and the potential that they could have, I think we all often lean into potential. So all stock is currently free at this stage.
All of it. And to get this stock, I didn't even mention this part. So to get this stock, because I did the maths and I went, I'm not going to go about this in a half-assed way. I know what they do on gondola specials just in my mate's stores that are New South Wales based. I can figure that out, scale that out to the 60 stores and figure out roughly what I'd need if I was successful and did this. And So to do it, I had to get on that US manufacturer. Now those guys had big lead times, massive minimums as well.
And then on the water.
And then, well, no, because I needed it on time for the gondola.
gonna
I
air
air
freight
freighted
it. Oh
all of
my
it.
gosh.
So I ended
That's
up
double the cost for anyone listening.
it was about back then. It was
Maybe
like
triple.
It ended up being about $6 a unit
Oh,
by the time it was landed.
you're looking to make about $10 a unit in some distribution
models, yeah.
models. So
So if I've eaten 6. So what I've done is I've gone out and I've gone, oh, fuck it, let's have a dig, yeah? Let's see what can happen if I did it. So I begged, borrowed, stealed, went to every bank, got every credit card, got loans from grandparents, got loans from friends, and put together a $254,000 purchase order, well, $250K including freight, with this factory. I just went, fuck it, I'm going for the big time. Now, if I thought 20K was big, this was my...
wait, and this is with the curcumin-based product.
Well, thankfully, no. I had since trialed that on the smaller scale, and I thought, no, we'll just not use this one. So as a pre-workout and my intra-war, which I have now still as a bit of a, I'm a nostalgic man. So that's an early throwback to some sentimentality. But the original intra-war was in there, and it's in its third rendition now. But that thing was that was what I used. So it was basically get a free, and then had to write off all of the initial stock to stock all the stores. So it was something like write off like 360 pre's, 360 intra workouts as well, and then I only got paid on the next restock that would happen if I sold through all of that initial stock in every store. I only got paid on the reorders, and again, all the BCA's part were free. So of that initial order, paying to actually buy the stuff up front, all with loans and high interest debt, because I was a very high risk kid. I had been on 40 grand a year forever, had this 20 grand personal loan sitting over here. So I had no bugger all income. I was working in a supplement store on retail wages at the time. Like I was a basket case. So I had to I'd get 3 or 4 different credit cards and max them all out. And I had to pay for this with so many different things. So I started the business when I did the ACN, it started $250,000 in the red from day one. And I gave away almost all of it. That $250,000 of stock ended up almost all going away at the shot that this might work. And the crazier part is it started looking like it was going to work. So that first month on the gondola end, it actually went red hot. This thing actually went okay. And enough for me to actually negotiate something that never happened before. I asked for a second month and it happened, which no one ever gets a back-to-back gondola special. But I pulled some strings and...
I would have given it to you on those terms.
Well, upon reflection, so I got it because I'm dumb. I got this back-to-back gondola special. I went, well, knowing what happens next, if you have these big national promotions, typically this chain, the way that we worked with suppliers was you'd planogram them. You put them in every single store, and I'd be rolled out in 60 stores with these products, and the juice would be worth the squeeze. I'd just written off all this stock, and this was a big part of why I bought so much stock too. It wasn't just, I hope I sell thousands. It was, well, I knew if I got planogram and what they would roughly roll out, this is how much I'd need. So I actually did the math on what a planogram rollout and a successful gondola and bought that. The real lesson came in when I went to sit down with them. I drove up to head office up in Queensland afterwards and sat down with them and said, all right, well, it went pretty good, yeah? Like, this is pretty cool. We had a double gondola, sold heaps of units. This is sick. They're like, yeah, man, but look, we haven't quite got enough market awareness yet. It's a bit risky. We're just going to sit on it. We're not going to planogram you. So at this point, I'm a kid with literally a one-car garage full of just stock, 15, 16, 17 pallets of stock just sitting in this thing, ready to go.
Is this conversation still with Grant Mayer, the main owner, or is this some other...
Grant and Mete. We were sitting down having that chat, and Mete's still in that seat, so it's quite funny. I still engage with him regularly, and it was the most crippling and brutal lesson in my business, or any part of my life, to be honest, at that point, because I had put in every single cent that wasn't mine, put myself $250,000 in the red to do this thing, given them tens and tens of thousands of free dollars of stock on the hope of getting planogram when they pulled it. And it broke me because I'm like, I am screwed.
I'm going to have to listen to the podcast that you did with Graham because I want to understand the dynamics now. That's amazing.
I'm a man. It's look, I'm a man of forgiveness, but it taught me a lesson, right? This thing gave me a powerful lesson, which was no matter how good, because at this time I was the first person in Australia to use Dynamine. We'd banned DMHA, and I was using Dynamine, that pre-workout called Warfare. I was one of the first guys to start using citrulline in a big way as well. So some of the
this is not too long ago then.
No, this would have been 2017, 2018.
Wow.
So this wasn't. It's in living memory. Like most of my staff haven't been around for that period of time yet, but it was within living memory. So it was definitely a very potent lesson because I incorporated the thing. I started off an ABN myself in 2015 as a sole trader, and then I put it to an ACN and incorporated it in 2017. And so that was when it's like I said, I went out and because I had to get all these big loans and really went hard at it.
We might have been purchasing stock off you around this time.
So, and you guys were getting a lot of the intra-war, a lot of the BCAs. I was using those to try and stimulate because I'm here going shit. I'm reeling. I have not a warehouse. I have my house full of stock because I was still just putting this stuff in the car and driving it down to the local like Aussie Post. I wasn't using couriers. I was just like this was all out of my house, just hand delivering whatever I could within a few hour radius and just fluking the rest. And I'm like, I'm screwed. I've got a mortgage worth of debt. I've got bugger all income. I've just quit my job out of respect. So I worked casually at a local independent store. I'm working casually 3 days a week. I am screwed. Like I'm getting $600 a week and I'm like properly done. And so it sort of did a very, well, I guess in hindsight, powerful lesson. Part one, if you don't, no matter how good your product is or formula is, if you don't have market awareness, if people don't know what it is, if they don't build trust with your marketplace, you will not get sales. That was a big lesson. I could be in the first thing really thrown in people's faces in 60 different locations across the country, in the biggest retail in the country, plus on their website, pushed as an aggressive special, the most illogically aggressive special you could ever do, where you're giving away, a $50 product with a $60 product. It's just dumb maths, right? You shouldn't do that. Even with the most aggressive special in the biggest retailer, in the most locations with prime location, sales did not equate to what they would consider impressive enough to bother keeping it.
Wow.
So doesn't matter formula. That taught me some big lessons around them. And I guess since seeing now, it's been 8 years in total, seeing the amount of legwork it takes to really get in the limelight on a national scale is quite brutal. The amount of work it takes to get noticed in all those arenas, it takes a lot. And I underestimated that early on. So what it did though is it taught me also that doing big business with big players was a heartless game in a lot of cases. Yep. And I never treated it as a heartless corporate thing. I never ran this thing that way. It was just me in a ute full of stock and just rolling around the country, just teaching people about subs. And so when I sort of did a bit of a vow there to go down the independent road instead. So instead of going for big corporate stores, I went for the Ma and Pa owned independent brick and mortar stores, people who are just, sole traders and guys who just love training or love subs and opened a store and real passion project guys, And I'd seek these guys out and start finding those stores. And I completely changed direction. My whole plan at this point was just get the big dog on, get national rollout, and just start big. Then that just shattered my dreams, put me in a massive place. I went, okay, well, I don't have the option anymore of making this a side hobby because this thing is drowning me in debt. I have to make the repayments, I have to make sales.
Yes.
So it forced me to go, well, shit. So I went from, and I was still having to work those casual, like I was working 5 days a week first casual and doing this all on weekends or outside of work hours. So I'd work the 9 till 6 there, go home, pack orders at night, and then in the morning.
the 9 till 6 where? Sorry?
So I was working East Coast Supplements actually at the point.
Okay, back to the retail.
Yeah, back to retail again. So working independent up my way. And I would pack my orders outside of hours and then like contact stores out of hours and so on. And then, drop it at the post office just before opening the store and rinse and repeat for a while until the point where I'd go, okay, but I'm like, well, now I don't have that luxury. I have to get out there and sell. This is a terrible idea. So I went to say 4 days and then would have a day trying to do it on stores and go hit the road. And this sort of massive handicap at the start it forced me to have a pretty messed up work ethic when I approached this because I didn't have an option if I didn't go out and sell product and really drive it, and it sort of made me get the business off the ground.
And you still had this debt attached to your name.
Oh god, yeah. It was all personal loans. It wasn't even through the business because the business was brand new. ACN day one, so I took them all as personal loans too. So me as an individual, I was a write-off. And I was going bankrupt as a person, not as a business. If this thing went under, I was like completely.
And so when you go bankrupt in Australia, you can't be a director of a company. So I guess my thought is like, why not just go bankrupt and find an alternate way to do business?
Because I guess one at the time, not business, but no business acumen.
Yep.
That as a normal person, when you say go bankrupt, it's a terrifying concept. Two is all these loans weren't done through the business. They were all done as dodgy loans. A lot of them were loans from friends or grandparents or credit cards in my name personally or loans in it took me quite a few years to discharge all of the loans attached to me as an individual and clean up my own act on paper because it wasn't. So if it was now under a fully fledged company that had trading history, you'd go to a bank and get all that finance and it's tied to the company and you could just dissolve a company or do whatever you need to do to get out of hot water. But back then though, it wasn't. It was just me as an individual getting cards and loans because the company had no trading history and then introducing those over time, but most of the time paying it with my own coin. So not getting an income from the days I had to go do sales repping and paying the loans out of this money.
Which might have been 17% credit cards.
Yeah, massively. They all were because they all had to be like parts of them would be sort of like lying, saying like I was going to buy a car or buy, buying,
Yeah.
so they'd give it to you as a personal loan interest. So yeah, it was like 13s, 11s, 15s, 17s. I did whatever I could sort of do. And it sort of made me really have a fire under me though, because I didn't have an option to sit still then. Because I'm like, if I do, I'm properly cooked. So
Was anyone else in your sort of life, like family, friends, giving you advice as to how you should be dealing with this problem, or were they not even aware of it?
no, they were they were aware of it. They didn't. What do you say to someone who's really successfully pulling their life apart?
Because I mean, 50 grand in debt, sure, that's a hole, but you can get out of it.
Yeah.
Coming toward a $250,000 and you haven't got sales on the
No, this is a real uncomfortable position to be in. And so what it made me do is really, and definitely, and other people in my life. So I was going through a divorce at this time as well at the same time, largely because I think probably not the often spoken about part of business startups is they consume
Yes.
all of you in a large extent. And I think when you realize how much they actually require of you, when you're running that in those early formative years, when you don't have the turnover to get staff to do tasks, or you can't delegate anything. You're all of it. You invoice, you pack orders, you speak to the factory, you do R&D, you do everything. If they're like everything, every single task is you.
Because you need to be highly efficient with the resources that you have. But if you're chasing your tail with debt, there's interest that's chasing you. Like then you need to become even more efficient. And so what do? You work more hours and you become efficient in every stage of the business, and it would consume you.
It did, and it made me go, and I had to go harder and harder because the debt was so big and also high interest. Those weekly repayments were massive, right? And
of course, yeah.
so there was I guess the early glimpses of going, oh, hopefully I could sell some tubs and you could pull a meager income out of it and whatever. But I also had this sort of overarching thing, because looking at the amount of people that had come through the doors in supplement stores I'd been working at now for a few years, people were really broken, particularly around the area that I was living at the time. I'd been in mining, so I knew firsthand how brutal that was on the body with shift work and being in harsh industrial environments, working massive hours, the stress. I saw a lot of people who were getting massive issues, chronic fatigue, burnout, adrenal issues were massive up my way. Women with thyroid issues, hormonal imbalances coming in. And it was, so I sort of had built alongside all this stuff happening turbulently on the financial side, on the personal side, and like mission statement wise, it had gone from, can I do this thing, to, give some people a better workout experience as a bodybuilder, to more so, actually, people out here are really, really broken. Like there's a lot of hormonal issues, there's a lot of stress, and that's starting to wreak havoc. Particularly stress has become my life's work the last few years, educating people on how cortisol is really just tearing their biology apart. I'm trying to, so it became a big mission statement of going, well, how do this thing could actually, if I wasn't just only around performance and bodybuilding, if I could actually start crafting formulas around to help some of the stuff that I had, because I've been using a lot of naturopathic herbs with my thyroid was quite slow, it turned out, and that was why I was different to my brothers going right back to the start. So I started integrating those and making products more around that. And that's where Metabolize started very early on. So it was grind and metabolize, and anyone looking at it now trying to start a brand off a non-stim pre and a thyroid-focused low-stim burner, it takes effort, man. It was a grind, and getting that stuff to going was hard. So, but that was a big passion project, was helping people, and I realized I could start doing that at scale. In a store, I could only serve the 5-10 people a day, whatever it was going to be. So you'd help that. Then you might help I suppose educate a PT or something. They might be able to help a few dozen people type thing in their community. But I started noticing on product, I'm like, I'm in at that point probably only 10, 15, 20 stores or something, plus the handful of NWs that kept it on. So I'm like, even these guys, this can scale help. This can mean I can touch more and more people on a bigger scale. And if I can try and make things that can help with these common issues I'm seeing by being in the stores all the time, I can actually I can help people improve health on a bigger scale than I thought I could.
So how much of this was you seeing an opportunity in the market based on, I guess, the lens that you're looking from it, having that science sort of background, versus you're under a whole bunch of pressure, you're thinking, I need to innovate in order to get myself out of this hole? Or was it a combination of both? Did it feel like one was more than the other?
I chose probably the real blunt force trauma method. Was the easiest thing to do would be to give the market what it wants. But I realized by being in stores those times, what people want isn't what they need.
Yes.
They'll ask for more caffeine and more stimulants when really they need more sleep and a burden taken off their adrenals. They'll ask for fat burners when really you need to look at why their thyroid's underperforming in the first place. Is that stress? Is that sleep? Is that a hormonal imbalance? Whatever. Everyone's looking for a Band-Aid downstream of what their actually problem is. So I guess I had an obligation piece when I was formulating these more and more because I loved playing with stims and pre-workouts was great in the early years.
Of course.
It's an easy sell, they move, whatever, everyone has fun, feels like good. But once I started learning more and more what that does, and what that does, particularly adrenally speaking, and when you have heavy stimulant use daily and people train in the evenings and so on, and what that played onto, I couldn't participate in that anymore. So I sort of, like, from an obligation piece, yes, I had this crippling debt. Yes, I knew that I had to do something about it and get sales on the board, but I no longer had the ability to formulate things like that would be the quick movers, because the quick movers, and they still are to this day, are the high stim products, but they would contribute to the problem I'm trying to fix as well at the same time. So my product formulations very much changed direction, and it went with those realizations of seeing people with the health issues and really working on that. And once it made it much harder for me, because I could have, you could sell out, so to speak, and I could have done just high sim stuff because you'd sell, right? But once I knew it, I couldn't. I was like, I just can't. I can't contribute. People are already overstressed, overworked, they're fried. If I throw more stimulants on top, stimulants are a direct increase of cortisol themselves. I'm just putting more fuel on the fire that's already raging. I don't want to contribute to a problem that's already a problem and make it worse. If I'm going to do something and on a scale, and I've got to feel good about this thing. I don't want to, because I've done enough jobs that I hated by this point.
Yeah. And was this potentially something, you obviously wanted to do something good, but you haven't felt like you were making profit for quite some time. So I'd almost say the reason that you're in business is not probably the reason that most people are in business at this stage, because as time goes on, if you're not making profit, sometimes you'll look for other reasons. And was that a contributing factor to say, well, I'm not making profit, but I am in this role, I am servicing people, and so if I'm going to be doing it, I at least want to have an impact that's, I guess, morally going to be beneficial, or just have a real impact from a science-based standpoint. But do you think the lack of profit that you're making in business because of those decisions ended up leading you into, well, I just want to have a positive impact because I'm spending so many hours per week doing this?
I haven't even asked that question before. That's a cracker question. Possibly. Because I feel blessed in that money was never a part of this whole thing, because I never had any walking into it, didn't expect anything walking out of it. So cracker question. I would say that I was probably blessed in that, being broke walking in, broke during it. Profit was never even, because it was a hopeless case. Trying to make profit, it didn't happen for probably after that from 2017, probably for the next 3 years I had to write off into, even with the company, I doubled it every year. So I really hooked into this thing, and we went from doing, at the start, it was doing like 30 grand a year turnover, and then it would go 30 to like 120, like I quadrupled it 1 year, then it would double again and go to, it was like 390, then I think it was like 600 or 700, then it went to 1.4s, and it just keeps doubling and doubling. And I doubled it every year for 5 consecutive years. And last year it tripled, it went up 314% last year. So I suppose by being so bored in it on that way, but not because I never had a chance to take money out or to actually access any of it, and it was always in such a hopeless case of going, we're so far behind, we just have to it's either sink or swim. We just have to tread water. Treading water is the goal. Money's not even a conversation at this point. Didn't pay myself for any of that until probably start of this year, meaningfully, last year in a pathetic way. So I think probably being not having that. If there had been easy profits from the start, I wouldn't have attacked it as intensely, and it probably wouldn't have made me find meaning in it as. Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say that it was contributing, because it wasn't about the money. That's for sure, and that's probably a lot of reasons why people start businesses. Like I really don't identify with a lot of, I suppose, friends who have started businesses since, and they'll do it for, I want a job that'll support a lifestyle, make some extra profit, and so on. I was like, is that really a fulfilling thing for you? Is that what you would?
But I guess you get that, you get the potential of having that perspective because you felt the other side. A lot of people haven't felt what it feels like to be up against that much debt. And so I think that's a unique perspective, and I think it's an awesome perspective to have. Like, I would potentially say that we've actually come from very different, we've experienced different trajectories which have led us to where we currently are in business, but I think we've made quite a few similar decisions. So we started playing with the hormonal-based supplements, looking into what the naturopaths are doing, because as soon as you understand hormones, you understand how important they are, which I still don't think our industry is there yet, as a side note. But I had formulated a couple of different hormonal products. But the reason that I formulated those was, yes, absolutely, because I thought that was what people would need, and I thought this was going to become more important in time. but I wasn't working for that same sort of framework that you were. We had made a decent amount of profit. And I almost think like I would explain the way that we started business was almost on a silver platter because my parents had given me a $20,000 loan. My best mate had taken on a $20,000 personal loan, but still had a job, so he was able to service that. There wasn't large amounts of risk like you experienced when you first started. And so as much as it may not be considered a silver platter to some people, I think it is. I think you're in Australia, you've been given money to start this thing. And so we had actually experienced taking profit probably from the second year. And so I might have been on maybe 100 grand worth of profit by the end of the second year anyway. And the choice to start the hormonal line was similar in some ways, but quite different in others. Similar because, yes, I thought this was really going to benefit people. And as soon as you start to look at stress and thyroid function and the way that fat distribution is caused on the body, you're only ever led to hormones. I think women taking the pill, when me and T first met, it was one of the things, like I think within 4 to 6 weeks, I was just like, I definitely don't want a baby, but I really would like you to get off this, and ended up releasing that xenoestrogen based product because, I was becoming aware of those. But we were working from a standpoint where profit, because as soon as I hit 100 grand, I didn't feel like I needed anything more in life. And so I was like, well, now I want to go do good. So it's real funny that you started from the perspective where it was like, I haven't got any profit, so I may as well do good. Where I was like, well, I've got plenty now. And I think by those standards, for someone that was young, didn't have a mortgage, 100 grand was plenty. So I was kind of like, well, I've got enough money now. Now I achieved what I thought I, needed to in business. I'm going to go try and do good now. But I do think I was probably more working from the standpoint, I'm going to do good because I think this is going to move later on. The internal margins are excellent, but, I do want to be helping people. And maybe just like I guess it's mostly in reflection now, but I think maybe as a secondary layer, our industry is full of vanity. And I think that can be really dangerous for a lot of people. They become extremely self-absorbed in this sort of process. And I think I was resonating less with that and so moved away from a lot of the bodybuilding competitor side of things, because I literally saw like girls that we were prepping, they would really focus in on themselves like a lot. Because you're consistently looking in the mirror. It's almost like just a part of the parcel. And I was like, I don't know that this is healthy. And I guess as a small side note, when I was prepping girls, I wouldn't go too low in calories because I was just like, this is hormonally not good for you. Like, I don't care if I can get a more crisp result on the day. I'm not willing to give you instructions which would lead you to, potentially damaging your body in some way. And so I think as I started to resonate less with the vanity side of our industry, which will always be there, it's a route, I was like, well, I want to go and do some things that are really going to help people. And so we'd have these middle-aged ladies come in and, they weren't feeling sexy for their husbands anymore. And I could kind of see that these adult decisions of skipping breakfast, relying on stimulants, not getting much sleep was really leading them to where they are physically. If we can change this hormonally, they're going to feel a lot better. And so it's kind of funny that we've come to similar sort of end places in we need to create a product for this. But where where we have made that decision from is quite different, which is, and I haven't heard a lot of these stories from you either, and we've known each other for years. So
Got to a products whilst you were going through this, and we had no idea.
Yeah, many didn't.
War, everything. Like
Well,
crazy to hear the story.
It's very. This is where I differ a bit. If you look back through the page, I suppose, very little of what I do has anything to do with me, which is a very unusual perspective perhaps to take on this stuff.
Super rare.
But if you think about once I realized that what I could do here was impact health on a big scale, right? I very quickly realized that it's either the formula, the knowledge, the information I can give people that does that. So I'm sort of the middleman, right? Like we don't own knowledge. I'm fortunate enough to be able to hold it somewhat of a decent library of it, but we don't own it unless you're like one of the few people, the real Einsteins, and who actually think up a concept. We're literally just keepers of it as it comes and goes.
Disseminating it.
To disseminate. And the more you keep, the more you have a moral obligation to dispense. And so I've put a lot of effort into doing hundreds and hundreds of in-person seminars and workshops and talks and educating hundreds of staff over the last nearly 10 years and now building an academy to actually train staff as well. And so I've really put a big energy into disseminating that information as well, because I feel we have an obligation piece to it. But in no point in that transaction does that knowledge, those formulations, the things, giving people the herbs or minerals they need to fix those things, I'm not really relevant in that. I'm just the dispenser thereof. Like I'm a middleman, so to speak. So I guess like I don't think that's why if you look back at the page, for example, I've probably got 4 posts on there in the last 8 years with me on it, because it's not really so I think I agree with you. The industry is very vanity based. A lot of it is very self-serving, and it can be very easy to get disheartened on that aspect. But I think when you said you don't know about the story, yeah, I sort of just, I've known what I've had to do for a long time, and so I just did it. And most don't know it though.
I think what I really like about what you're saying, and I guess just to summarize my little side quest there, wanting to do good in business though can open up real opportunities. And so I think for yourself, you're experiencing that on a national level. You've developed lines that are not just the fast category movers. You really wanted to solve a problem, which is, I think, only going to get worse. And hopefully the profits that come from solving a problem that is a real issue for people gives you all that it should. I think we experienced it sort of on a small level where we were mostly doing it as internal lines, and we would have sold quite a few $100,000 worth of herbal lines, and the margins involved with them are relatively good.
Yeah.
And so it did well for us in that instance, and we were able to help sort of on a localized level. But both of these sort of situations are coming from actually wanting to do good, which I still think is the best thing to do in business. Whether for me it was, yes, it is a more profitable thing, but it's still doing the right thing. Or for yourself, I'm not making any profit, so I should do the right thing. I think it really is something in business. If you do the right thing, you can be in business a lot longer.
You can.
Because the guys that are just going to continually put out high stim formulas, the product life cycle is already shorter of those products. Yep. But I mean, I think they're going to find it harder to stay in business.
Agreed. And you see at the very, that's probably the one nice thing about making products that are very, my more thyroid focused products for adrenals or testosterone or estrogen or things that are about those. They're things that you use year round to help balance and keep your body in check and have a catcher's mitt against how at odds our physiology is to current way we live life in a modern setting. So that's given me a nice thing from a business perspective of smoothing out those peaks and troughs that other businesses built on pump and dump style products, flavor of the month style products would experience. I don't get any fluctuations at all. We're insanely linear, very, very stable, because the things that I built they don't go away. Like you always need good sleep. You always need micronutrients. You always need things to help with it. Those things are year round. They're daily consumables that help health, right? And so it does as a byproduct. I listened to a really good interview with Seth Godin previously, and he's a founder of 40 odd novels. He's done 1,000 in-person speeches, right?
Yeah, we're very familiar with him. He's good.
Amazing man. And interestingly enough, he had that before. He was really, and I think I got this point when the profits finally did come, right? Because I'd never known it. It was weird to no longer to have that feeling of you have to sink or swim, go away for a while. It was almost uncomfortable and weird, and so it put me in a bit of a search for meaning and purpose out of things when it's no longer as hard. Because when it's hard, you do it because you have to survive. When it's comfortable, then you're right. You get the chance to recalibrate and do it from a place of abundance as opposed to lack. So when you were saying you came at it from the silver platter angle and had the profit from day one, well, look, that's fantastic, because you would have come at it from a place of abundance. You're going, well, I have more than I need. I'm good. I can now go out and help others from a full cup. I'm sweet. I always had to come up from well, I'm screwed if I don't. I want, helping you helps me stay alive. I have to do this. So when I got a chance to I had to recalibrate a lot, and a lot of that meaning came from trying to find it. Yeah, and I guess because I'm very big on you have to have purpose in what you're doing. You have to have meaning there, because you can endure. There's a lot of stress coming with it, regardless of whether you're doing whatever your business is, whatever you're doing.
There's stress.
There's stress, right? And so to endure that, if you don't have a why or a purpose, you're not going to have any chance in hell of surviving the crippling, ongoing, long-term, undulating stress that goes with it, right? You just burn out.
It's just easy not to.
Yeah, it's easy not to, right? And if you don't have a good enough why, then you won't. And that was what Seth, for that little tangent. So he'd done 1,000 speeches at these, and he spent the better part of his 40s and 50s on planes. And he's like, I think I've earned the right to just not have to do these things in person. If I can Skype it, I'll Skype it. Otherwise, look, I'm good. I'll only do things that matter to me. But he got this guy who had a guy who'd started a foundation down here in Australia actually, and he was asked. He reached out to Seth saying, "Look, could you come down and talk? I've built a foundation here full of other entrepreneurs who want to raise money for cancer, basically." And his daughter had a terminal cancer, and it was real. Wow. And he went, "Well, I've got the right to only speak at things I think are of impact, and this thing sounds like it's of impact, right? This is pretty heavy." So he got on the plane, flew down. Whilst he was here preparing for this speech, he went swimming and he got caught in a massive rip and nearly drowned, and properly nearly died, within minutes of actually drowning. He was a write-off. Clambers to shore, gets there. And at this point, he'd pretty much retired. He's like, I'm done with, I don't really have to talk, and I'm not going to unless it's something of meaning, which was this event. And writing books wise, he did a bit of a oath to himself. I won't write a book unless I have to, unless there's a good reason to do it. I won't just write for the sake of writing anymore. I'm no longer just an author for the sake of being an author. After having this near-death experience, and he went, well, what's the point? He went away after that, and in 2 weeks following, belted out a 96,000-word manuscript that became a book. He wrote a whole book in 2 weeks. He normally does it over like 12 months. And in this interview, he unpacks the reason why is that he realized, he goes, well, fair enough. What I'm going to do in this world is I want to leave it better than I found it, using the skills that are unique to me. And that's a good enough reason to do anything that I think I could find. And he said he'd only do something if he had a good reason to do it. And so he went out and wrote that book after saying, basically, I'm retired, I don't need to write books. Because he went, well, I'm going to leave the world a better place by writing that book. I have the skills to do so. I should. And therefore I should, right? And so I think that if there is the underlying fuel source for it, that fuel source doesn't really run out easily. Whereas fuel source of money, say, or if they're trying to do it for a lifestyle or what have you, or even in case of like early on, it might be running away from something. You might see it with people running away from a broken home, or they've had early trauma, or things have really, and they turn that anger into fuel to make them work harder. That all runs out over time.
Yes.
We all, you can only run away from something for so long. You can only run off fuel or fear or whatever for so long. You've got to at some point make your fuel source something bigger than just, I used to be unhappy, so now that runs out eventually. You come to peace with it, you put it to bed, you process the trauma, whatever you need to do, it runs out. So you need to find something that makes you stick in business long enough. And most of the time, I think, for me anyway, recently, that's become now I'm going from the full cup model. It's, well, I've got a skill set that can help people, so I should. And I think if people approach that in business, if most of the listeners to this podcast are people doing businesses or starting them, I would implore them to look at what skills do you have that are unique to you and that may be of service to others, and leave the world a better place than you started. And if you can do that, do so, and you'll always have it work.
And at what stage do you think people should be having that conversation, though? Because I think there probably is the reality is that skill sets grow in business over time. And I think I've seen a lot of young guys wanting to start from a place of impact, which sounds almost wrong to say, look, man, I don't think you should be starting. I think you should put some runs on the ball before you try and impact anyone. But it is a good question, because you did say that Seth Godin said something like, I only want to do things that matter now. And so I think as a business grows, the activities that you apply yourself to are going to have various trains of thought. You could think, I'm only going to do things that are high revenue generating activities, things that I can do that staff can't. And so I'm going to, staff out the things that, without being offensive, are mundane to the business, that are normal operations that need to be carried out, so I can go do higher activities. Some people are doing that for more profit, and others, it sounds like yourself, you're actually wanting to do this because you want to apply purpose to what you're doing. Is that a luxury of having profit that you can go and chase those things? Or do you think we should be trying to input impact into all that we do at the start?
I'd go the latter. I think I was trying to input impact from the start. And I think that's what made people resonate with and actually give me a shot. Because as a guy literally rolling stock around the countryside in his ute, like literally just pulling tubs out of his car, there was really no reason for him to stock you over, say, the given popular American brand at the time, or any other brand that was there with a huge marketing budget and a huge team and sales reps on the road and all of it, right?
Yeah.
So, I think the only reason I had the shot was because people could figure out early on that I wasn't doing this for the same reason other people were. So I don't know. For me, it's always been there. It's been a bit of a constant. Like once I knew what I needed to do, that was part of everything that I did, and it's where a big part of how I shape company culture now. I really make sure all my guys in the key seats know that we're doing this for that reason, and to the point where we broke down revenue at end of financial year this week. I broke it down into people, so like average units we sold, and then broke that down into an average how many people would use any products and whatever, and then did that as a number. And we impacted in that financial year, instead of going there's X amount of revenue, say, or we grew X amount of percentage, I put it into people instead. Wow. So yesterday we figured out it was 253,000 people we impacted in 12 months. And I went, well, fuck, if we can impact 250,000 people in a year, that's when you're making proper change. Yeah, that's when you're doing and whether that's something simple. I'm not going to say this is glorifying. I'm going to change people's health in all of them. There are the outliers where I've had people completely flip their health around. But I mean, even something simple as they are getting a protein intake now as opposed to not. They might be getting something in that helps, sleep and a bit of stress and what have you. But it's making a positive impact regardless which way you spin it on 250,000 people in that period of time. putting into a dollar figure is far less fulfilling for me. So, but I'm a bit weird. So I've always had that as the
It's a principle to you then.
bingo, and it's principle only because I never had anything else. Only like 7 of the 8 years I didn't pay myself, so there was never money to fuel it. There was never, the lifestyle was shit. It was just me doing all of it, and so it wasn't like, oh, there's any other positives or luxuries alongside it other than I got to do what I thought was the right thing to do. So it was only principle. And I remind people in the key seats now of like what of that, because I think I want that to be the company culture that endures. If I at some point I want to leave the industry better than I found it. So that's why I'm big on the education thing. I'm like, I want to make sure other people know this stuff so they can pass that on. And then I built that academy out and so on, and trying to really, all my staff, company culture, I'm massive on that though. Know why we're doing it, know the overarching vision, and know that you're part of this ecosystem for that reason. You helping the marketing so that you can get more customer awareness of what we're trying to do, so this product can help this many people do that. Make each person aware of where they fit in that. But that's 100%, man, principle on it, because I'm lucky enough that a lot of those guys that joined the team were in a similar place. Like a lot of them are young kids. Like a lot of them are trained. Like I'm starting to train up new reps, like having trainees, and it's really cool getting these kids who are in their 20s just starting out, and they might have had big weight loss journeys themselves. Like 2 of them have lost 20, 30 kilos themselves. One of them's lost 50, and he lost 50 kilos by himself using just my stuff. And he's just a kid from a country town near where I grew up, and I've known him and knew his mum and and served him as when I was in the store. And it's got, so I don't know, I think, and that's the thing that makes it there, because I don't know, I almost lost meaning when the money came, to be honest. I almost lost drive and lost a bit of I don't know, cheapened the romance of what I was trying to do in an extent, I think, when it became monetized. And so I try and keep flicking it back to people or purpose or why, because otherwise I don't know, if it's just for the sake of coin, we only need so much. And I don't know.
It doesn't actually make you that much happier.
It doesn't, man. It doesn't. And I sat down, I went to FIBO over in Germany. It's the biggest fitness expo in the world. And I went over there, and like, even an example there, like I told myself I wouldn't travel until I'd sorted my life out later on. And I wanted to have a crack at this business. So I put everything on hold, like divorces, homes. I was homeless for a period during the startup. And like all this sort of stuff happened. So I put it all off, and I didn't travel for 11 years. I thought, I'll have a holiday one day. I didn't think it'd be that long, but so I went over there, met this guy, and he was in his 50s now, and he started one of a very, very big company over there, big supplement company over in the US. And it's taken him, they're at year 20 now, and they didn't pay themselves for 12 of those years either. Wow. So like remarkable endurance. I thought 8 years was bad. And but what was interesting, I asked him, I was like, all right, mate, well, your company's on track to do 100 million US turnover, like it's a beast. There's only you and the original founder are still the original guys that own it. So it's just 2 owners. Like, all right, obviously you got a bit of coin floating around. So give me some lessons. What would you say if you're my age? I'm at this point, business turnover, where I'm in, and so on. He goes, mate, where you were. He goes, I would optimize for optimize for lifestyle, optimize for meaning and purpose in what you're doing, and assess what you want your life to look like first, because he goes, to be honest, with the pay increased every year, in some years exponentially, but quality of life didn't. He said, I've got a apartment in California there overlooking the ocean. He's got like a garage full of sports cars. He goes, I get to drive the sports car on the weekend on a Sunday when I drive to my yoga class. But he goes, outside of that, mate, he goes, I work massive hours. The stress increased, the income increased, but the quality of life that stress took away was not proportional to the income. And the income doesn't improve any. Once I, had these apartments and chateaus and had the sports cars and all this sort of work, he goes, it didn't really change where I was at, mate. He goes, so remember like what you're doing it for, and try and optimize for those things. Because if you optimize for income, he said there's a very, very non-linear curve. There's a bell curve on that thing. It's the law of diminishing returns. And it seems to be somewhere around, I think it was the Gottman Institute that looked at this. Like there was a very much, the bell curve seems to sit around literally just what you need plus a small percentage. It was about 5 years ago, it was 65K. Yep. Was what they said was where above that there was no longer a linear increase that matched. It didn't correlate anymore. If they went from 100K, they weren't double as happy as at 50K per annum. And they found after 65K, that was a tipping point, because it was back then, call that a grand take home a week or so. And he said it covered most expenses. And once people's expenses were covered, most of the time that was where quality of life was pretty much on its spot on, and it went up marginally with income, but not linear. So
I think that's something me and T have definitely experienced as well. But I think I think we've already had that principle, probably because of our faith. We've never gone out and chased money as such. and the material things that it could buy. As much as we do like some nice things here or there, it's definitely hasn't been a core part of why we've gone into business, and we really have tried to offer opportunities to other people. And I think we have optimized for lifestyle because our relationship with each other is so important. We actually wanted that time, and so I think we've made probably several business decisions which have really decreased the potential upside because we don't value the extra money that much.
Great lesson there. Great
Yeah,
one.
and it's like TNs aren't that expensive. Like we don't need to make that many sales. But I think that's certainly like a sustainable why that you're talking about as a part of your business. But a part of business sustainability is also having business acumen. And so the top line profits have, as you said, have been doubling, if not tripling each year. And it's often something that we've experienced in business as you've tried to scale, although the scaling we're talking about is quite small in comparison. The top line numbers can be quite impressive, or at least impressive to you if they are doubling or tripling. But the bottom line numbers, so this is profit, so this is actual profit. So top line meaning turnover, revenue, sales. All the expenses that it takes to make those sales will spit out your bottom line number.
Yep.
And so quite often the feeling of having top line increase, but the bottom line really not increase. The money in the bank doesn't seem to be there when you're in the process of scaling or growing. And often this is because there's additional cash tied up in inventory if you're expanding lines, if you're serving more customers, or if you're bringing on a new staff member. These are attracting more expenses to have the potential at growing top line, but it's quite a long time often before you see those bottom line numbers increase. So could you give us sort of, I guess, your feeling on what it feels like to be doubling, tripling a business, having that top line growth, but really not seeing that bottom line change? Because we've obviously now progressed from a period where you're out of debt, you're starting to feel those profits come in. What did it really feel like? Did you feel like, because I know that I felt like I was doing something wrong in business when I didn't see the bottom line, I guess, increasing in the proportion that it should be in relation to top line.
Yeah, you'd think if you double sales, you'll double profit, right? But you don't. Net profit is very much a fickle beast. It runs away all the time from turnover. And you agreed. So, and look, mine's pretty labor intensive because it's wholesale, right? So I'll make that discerning difference now that obviously if you're direct to consumer and you're mainly e-commerce based or website based, there is a certain it's probably more linear than mine because mine requires physical people to go into physical brick and mortar stores, have actual conversations that take X amount of time, go there and do taste testings in person. We go and do seminars in person. So we're quite labor intensive. So we hire, as our turnover increases, it's off the back of more sales reps, more staff, and then the more turnover because it's wholesale, it's volume of orders. They're not sending a tub, we're sending 70, 80 units that have to be hand packed in boxes. So that means you have to store that somewhere. And as you grow revenue, you have to make bigger warehouses to hold more stock, more people to pack those tubs into more boxes, sending more freight increases as well. Then you need more reps going to more stores to service those increased accounts. Then you need, so yes, I would say that there's these little, it's cyclical. You'll see there are periods where you're in a sweet spot where it might be, for your point in the business life cycle, turnover is resulting in a good net profit because you might be running the team lean, but that's not sustainable on the team. So you might have points that are good for the business bottom line, but really burning out staff quickly because it might be that people are wearing multiple hats and they're doing lots of different roles in the business, but they will inevitably, unfortunately, hit a work capacity issue. Yes. So they'll get to a point where they've reached their threshold for work and it's like, oh, this is great for profit because we've only got 2 people on the ground doing disproportionate amounts of work. And I'm lucky enough to have some real superstars in my business where like they disproportionately perform. Like what I'd expect of a standard sales rep when I employ them versus what I have in my sales team, they double what a normal rep does. But they live and breathe that they work 24/7. They don't turn their phones off. They're on public holidays, on long weekends. They're in stores every day of the week. Like they're just freaks, right? So I'm very fortunate that their work capacity outstrips most. So I have had periods in the business cycle where net profits remained healthier than it would, given that if I was to have scale that out to the amount of staff I should have for the turnover.
Because you're getting disproportionate efficiency from staff.
Yes.
But the reason that's coming is because they want to be a part of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that which is super interesting because we experience that exact same thing. We certainly get disproportionate efficiency out of our staff, but it's because they want to be a part of the network. But where I wanted to just join those two together, so you have a sustainable why, but you have the need for business acumen and to be able to understand that as top line grows, you may need more working parts to allow that growth, which results usually, depending on what industry you're working within, because as we said, there is a different way, I guess a different level of trajectory or linear trajectory, depending on which part of the value chain that you sit within. But if you are doing things for impact, because you said at the end of the year, you were actually finding out how many people that you are impacting. This business decision is being made based on impact. So your top line, I assume you want to keep on growing because you'll be impacting more people, despite if that means net profit decreasing.
Well, we did and does and will, because you go through phases, and growth phases by definition are brutal on cash flow. You will be broke. It's a weird feeling to be
turning over more than you ever have in your life
and be broke. And that's always been, and luckily enough, I'm just familiar with that feeling. So it's never been a drama, but like always having the bank account empty is a very normal aspect of growth, because you're buying more inventory. As you said, you're investing in more staff, you're doing more, you're having to buy more than you're selling, especially in wholesale. There's a lead time for production. So you're purchasing stock ahead of time, plus what you hold in the warehouse. But then the marketplace also needs to have all their shelves filled. So, in my instance, you might have, a mill out in the marketplace on shelves in stores. But then you also need that mill backed up at the warehouse. Then you also need that mill in order on the way, say, as examples for nice round numbers. And so, that if you want you might have to triple your whatever your actual goal is. If you want to do 5 mil, 10 mil, 20 mil, whatever it is, you have to triple it basically in stock demand, because it's so cash intensive. So I had months, like last month was a cracker month that I had a loss on paper because cost of goods is so high, because I'm buying more than I'm selling by far. So it looks terrible on a P&L because you're always buying so much more stock than you actually physically need. If I was direct consumer and just made, this is my sales, therefore that's the amount of tubs sold, I'd be sweet. But you've got to buy in advance, plus have what's sitting there just capitalized, then also fund the marketplace, and they're on terms for 30 days. So then you've got a 3 to 4 month float. So and the bigger you got, the bigger the float got. So it was not only the growth of more staff, more warehouse, more everything. Like it was just by net. That was why there was no option to pull anything out. I had to reinvest every cent of net the entire time.
Otherwise, you cap growth and you cap how many people you can impact.
You do, and 100%. And so I see it now. You've got to have this. Like I even have like a at the moment it's about an 80-20, like literally 80% reinvestment of net, just taking out bugger all just to make an income, and reinvest 80% of net to fuel that growth. So, and there are months where that goes technically negative, depending on we have to order in surplus by definition. So in a wholesale business model, yes, net profit runs very, very lean in our sector, and as you grow, it will get less and less, and with the goal being. So, for example, I'm in a big growth phase in staff. So I went here, turnover increase off the backs of some real superstars who disproportionately performed it. Then I went, well, that's not sustainable too forever. At some point, us workhorses get burnt out. So,
sorry, just to capture that, because that's really good. Understanding that the reason that you're disproportionately getting efficiency in sales from someone is not sustainable. And so you can't base your business around this person continually like giving you disproportionate benefits, because it's something that happens in businesses all the time. You'll get this growth offer and you'll be like, cool, we need to build under this. It's just like, are you building under something that's not sustainable?
Are you building the castle on sand? Yeah. And I notice this in myself more so, because after nearly 10 years of this, I suppose, like between like the early stuff, doing large hours in mining, military as well. Like I've always just worked a lot. Like since I was, even during uni, I had 3 jobs, I've always worked. So I guess it was okay for me to do 70-hour weeks for 10 years straight, but most don't want that, right? And most people didn't want to go through the homelessness or divorce and all that sort of stuff that goes with it. So you got to, there's trade-offs. So I went, well, knowing personally what burnout does to you and knowing personally how intensive that is on your life, I just...
You can't require that of your staff.
You can't, and you can't assume it, and it's not fair to. You if they wish to give of their own fruition, if they wish to go, then sweet.
Amazing.
Awesome. Like this
because they might be a you.
They might be a me. Yeah. They might go, sweet, this is a mission that I want to be part of. This is impactful. This is doing something of meaning with my life. So I'll throw myself at it. Awesome. Love to have you on board. Let's go. Here's the mission. But I won't expect it, because what I did, no one would logically do. None of that was logical. All that backstory was spastic of me to do. So no, I wouldn't expect it of someone else. So now what I'm trying to do is build the foundations under them, right? And give them all people to train up, to make them, to give in the vision of the maker, so to speak, to give them all trainees to build up, to make in the eyes of them, I suppose, the part of the mission, board in, part of the group, and continue it on, because I want this thing to be around for 10, 20 years to be a real legacy piece, right? So with this, it means I went from having 5 staff to 11 in a short space. So it's really really put extra strain on the back end. But so you'll go through periods where last year, for example, it was only the high performers with no bugger all supporting staff. We were skimped on the back end, but net profit was high, which allowed the growth. Then this year, I've put, growth has been, it's still aggressive, but it's in a good spot, more linear than exponential like last year. But I've gone heavy on staff on back end. So I suppose that's also then that'll impact the net profit. So it's like, whilst we're not so violently exponentially growing this year as much, we might double instead of triple, for example. We will, I suppose I'll have more staff costs to offset the cost of goods I would otherwise have had to fork out for. So 100%, mate. I think if you're growing, you're broke. Usually, unless you've got exceedingly high margins. If you're like direct to consumer and you're running on 70 or 80 GP, sweet, you can grow all you want. There's just buckets of cash, right? But
and sometimes just realizing that because raw materials have to make their way to an island that we call Australia, there aren't the same margins as if you went over and looked in the US. It's like so often they're like, oh, if it's less than 80% margin, we're not chatting. And it's just like, that's not an option for us.
No, half that, even a quarter in wholesale.
But yeah, so if someone was to look over your business and someone like me that like isn't necessarily scaling for growth, because if I was doing that, I'd be scaling for an exit, to be 100% honest. But if you're scaling to cause impact, if I was to look over the business, I'd be saying things like, well, you need to cut costs here, or you need to be, minimizing some of the costs here so that we can get that net profit number, increased. But people make different decisions in business for reasons that you may not hold to be the same. And I've really like noticed that as I guess had a few more experiences dealing with businesses. Often you'll say, well, why aren't you doing this? This is clearly the right answer. And they'll give you an answer that is something like, this is my value, this is my principle, this is what's more important to me, this is my priority. And so often people make different decisions in business because they hold different values. And so often you can't just say, oh, well, what are you doing, mate? Like, you're increasing costs and you could be way more efficient here. Like, you're making the sales, you'd think that's the hard part. You could be driving higher net profits here. And it could literally be the reason because I'm not doing business for the same reason that you're doing business.
Isn't it a fascinating one? I'm just going to like that little bit there. You're making sales, but right. So just to like pull that out and zoom in on that. The first few years you'll be really fighting for every dollar. Every dollar of revenue, every sale is like a breath of fresh air. You're like, oh, thank God, I can breathe. I've made a sale. I can keep the lights on for another day. Oh my God, you're begging and scraping and stealing for every bit of market share. Every sale you can make is a bonus. Everything is so impactful and massive, right? Like the first few years, it's taken a long time to make the sale. By the time you get in a business model where you can take sales for granted to an extent, or you've done your craft well for a long time, because I think if all your listeners are budding young entrepreneurs or guys who are starting their own businesses, the first
sales seems like the hardest thing.
Sales is the hardest part for them, right? Like, it's all about, and then it doesn't come till much, much later once you've gone to the market, tested the market, provided a product to see if that's what they're asking for, then try and scale all that down to, and then actually get that to them in an efficient way that's profitable, blah, blah. But it all starts with, can you get the marketplace to do they demand what you're offering? Do they want what you're offering? And that's the I guess the preliminary step we probably skipped over in all this stuff because we both have established businesses, but it's such a crucial part. And probably focus-wise, if people are listening to this who are in the first 1 to 3 years, they're probably going, oh, but these guys are just, it's an assumption sales, right? But I guess it would do them a disservice to not say, we both have been in businesses where we have to really go out and aggressively try and take market share. And especially supplements are such a saturated industry, right? To make difference in this space it's remarkably hard. It's very saturated. For every one offering, there might be 20 or 30 others that are similar with slight differences, with equally great packaging, equally great margin, equally great marketing support. Like, you really have to make your difference known in this industry more than any.
I think you're absolutely right. And we probably are taking sales for granted because we've developed a craft that would allow us to look at it that way. I think we've probably even got a more adulterated lens because we're so heavily involved in the marketing space. Quite often the conversation, is this going to work? It's more like, have we got our back end in check, like to be able to deal with volume? Like, it's almost sometimes you're assuming volume. Yeah. And it is something that I do regularly check in myself because I'm just like, we both started from areas where sales definitely weren't a guaranteed thing, but that is a really good point that you've made. As you develop your craft, sometimes sales you assume are going to come, and as we move into a recessionary period, that assumption is probably going to have to be
relooked at. But then later on, then weirdly enough, so you spend all this time pushing a rock up a hill and really just like killing yourself to get this thing to the top. Then you reach this weird snowball point where it rolls down the other side of the hill and it gets its own momentum, and then sales just start flooding in. Yes. And that's a different life cycle for every business. But for me, that's probably been the last 2 years out of the 8. The first 6 were building different renditions of dozens of different products that most of the market would have forgotten of by now, that have come and gone. I've tested them. Maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. I've done probably 6 rebrands. Like, I've really, battle tested all these different thoughts and processes and tried different things and had different staff come and go and different warehouses, done it in my house, done it out of small warehouses, done it at garages, done it, all these different things. So you get to a point where you build it, and that's all happening whilst you're pushing up the hill and refining the model. Then it starts running away. Then it starts snowballing in the marketplace. If you make a good product that the market talks about and referrals happen and so on, then it starts getting its own momentum and starts gathering its own speed, and then sales do start happening. And then you get this other weird part where you're going, oh shit, well, how does the back end keep up with that? What if now I almost get scared of it at the start? You were saying stuff about international things, right? It's almost more scary going, well, how would I, if I were to, before it would be like a pipe dream. What if I landed an international contract? Now it's more so, what the fuck do you do if you land one? How do you, oh my God, the amount of capital that requires, the amount of stock that requires, logistically, freight, oh God, filling a 40-footer of stock and floating it for 3 months. And like, it becomes, you almost get scared of the sales because you know what it would demand of you in the business and what it
a very interesting concept, yeah.
Which is bizarre because you never think yourself as scared of sales, right? It's almost like, I know I could double sales again if I wanted, but it's like, at what cost? And is that a cost you're willing to make? Is I've seen how uncomfortable it is for all staff involved to basically burn out the entire company to triple revenues messed up, right? Like typically you might talk 10% per annum or 20% per annum year on year. So for 314%, it nearly broke every single person who touched that business, right? Like it killed all of us. But so I think I'm acutely aware of what it demands of you when I ask the team to do a certain number. Because I go, well, if that's doubling, well, I know what doubling does, and that demands a lot more than you might be willing to give. Yeah. And I think
you actually start to correlate numbers with what that requires of
yes.
people.
Yeah, you start figuring out. You're like, oh, I know what it's like to double this thing. Well, it's going to sting. Like, you really want to do that?
so I guess to check, so where my mind would go, if you wanted to go internationally, I would automatically think you're not like making the products still in Australia and shipping them out. You'd find a contract manufacturer, give them your formula, get it all labeled and distributed in some sort of 3PL way over there. Like that would have been my mindset approaching it, because like it's a lot less labor intensive. Find a distributor that can, hold the brand. But is that thought pattern something that's very different to yours? Did you actually start thinking, well, if I was going to attack that this way, if I was going to try and take on that level of challenge, where did your mindset start from? Is it we do things how we do things, or I need to find another way?
Yeah, I'm notoriously old school. I actually, funny enough, when I was in other countries, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get on the ground and go visit stores, and just like, literally, I did when I was in Europe.
It's so funny though, because like as much as I would see that as extremely inefficient, I would actually do the same thing though, because I think I know the benefit of face-to-face conversations.
It does, and it's disproportionately impactful, right? So it outweighs 10,000 cold calls or emails, or like, I mean, when I was there, and like in there are certain things you have to do over time that are inefficient and laughably so, but that you have to do. So like a lot of the stuff's not logical, right? Like you said before, the opportunity cost, usually you've got to weigh that up. So when I'm doing these things, like that's how I did it. When I started going, how do I look at this? So I went to FIBO, I went, all right, let's go to Europe. How does Europe do supplements? I started going to different countries. All right, what do stores do? What's a normal product? What's their margin? What do they look like? Start speaking to the stores there. Hey, this is something I've noticed. This is something I care about. Do you care about that? Do you have customers like this? Do you have product? Do you wish you had products like this? And you started asking it, and lo and behold, there's a universal similarity, right? And so, yeah, it's funny. My mind went straight to, I need to get on the ground, and I need to do this. I need to get into this. Is how I've always done it. This is how I do it.
This is so funny to hear this, because we literally did this in South Africa 6 months ago. So we went over for a holiday. It was a business trip, but we went to a retailer and had a chat with the guy and said, what are you buying your products for? Like, why are people walking in? What brands are like people sort of like gravitating to? Is it the US brands like it was 10 years ago? Or is this, are your customers happy to take whatever you recommend? And so it was literally walking into a retail store over in South Africa, finding out what's going on. And then for me, I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to manufacture here and send it because, there's a bit of water in between us. I'm going to contact the manufacturers that are there, and then you'd use the processes that you've developed over time to find out what that looks like, understand the margins. And it was looking something like something that I did just want to experiment for fun with. We're in a court case now at the moment. Unrelated.
On that. I don't know when I'm going to upload this episode, but there will be a court case episode.
Which has kind of restrained, I guess, my level of seeking fun for the moment. But yeah, it's so funny. Like I still went back to going into a retail store because being a retailer, and I guess dabbling in some of the I guess distribution space. I wanted to find out what it looked like at the retail level, because I feel like the context at the retail level, which you experienced as well, can massively I guess, guide you to how you may release a
100%.
product.
Because people forget, like, I was very lucky that I was in the stores whilst I was formulating products. I was selling them to the person and asking them for the next day to come in, how did that go for you, for years.
Ground feedback, man.
It is. You can't beat it because all the people, and that's what I realized very early on. The people who are formulating these things don't don't put foot in a gym. They don't put foot in a supplement store. They don't
Sometimes
put foot
they're just marketing companies. They're not even in the industry.
and
Like 500 milligrams of like citrulline or something in a product. You're just like, you've never used this.
and I think I realized early on the guys who were formulating weren't in stores, weren't on a taste testing table, weren't doing the talks themselves, weren't doing the seminars themselves, weren't asking customers one-on-one, how does this go for you, weren't messaging them individually, how's this go for you. Like, so I think it's a real blessing that I had that early stuff, and that teaches you later on. Sometimes the real basic stuff is actually the fundamentals of what to build a business on, because that's the person you'll have to target, right? That retailer. If you're going to build an overseas thing, how do the retailers think? What are their problems they're facing? What are they doing? And then if you want to source, everything else can be worked backwards from, like source factories, MOQs, minimums, lead times. Well, it's all, that all comes. But yeah, I think you have to work backwards from the start. Go, what's on the ground? What's happening on the ground? What do they need? Are they? What categories are currently? What are gaps? What are their problems with customers? What are their issues with? What are their issues, right? And then how are they doing it now? How's their model work? And you'll find there's some sort of similarities. It's quite a lot of things are actually similar. And so yeah, I'd actually it's weird, but I just get in a plane. Is how I'd do it. If I later on, obviously, then you work backwards. So I tend to reverse engineer that. I'd then go forth, do the thing, establish the thing, then go, all right, how to make that work, and then so I spoke to the factories, then I asked their pricing and lead times and minimums and how I'd do it and warehouse pricing and rent and everything. So that was all after the fact. But first thing, go speak to stores, go speak to brand owners, go to the expo, look at what are the customers shopping for, look at what customers are going to what booths and asking for what. Just kick it old school, and then figure it out from there, because that's what you're actually servicing. That's whether I went through a distributor, did it myself, that's who I'm ultimately servicing is, the person. What is the customer asking for? What's the store being asked for? What would they ask of me? And
so I guess there's an insight for small business owners then. So you've got context of the retail space. You've had some massive growth and I guess now servicing big box retailers, you're servicing independents. How do the conversations differ from having conversation with small retailers that might be like trying to squeeze you for an extra 2% gross profit? Could be me. Or asking for a gift with product like you were talking about with the Intrawar alongside your pre-workout, which I didn't know was an offer. We might have to hit you up for that one.
It's not anymore. Offers off the table.
And then going into those big box retailers, because you actually have market context and retail context. I think two questions. How do the conversations change? Like, how does it differ? But what are you seeing that the small retailers have that the big retailers have forgot about because they become more concerned with quantitative data and forget that lower level context?
I think the small players have got what I've got. I think they're more purpose-based, impact-based. I think they remember why they're doing it. I think they know why they love it very clearly. I think the problem that I'm seeing now in the big stores at a ground level is that the franchises run like a well-oiled machine. They've got every single thing automated so much so that the staff, unfortunately, could be replaced with a robot tomorrow and they wouldn't know a difference. But what that does for satisfaction of those workers is that it completely takes away any fulfillment or joy or what have you. And then because they're not fulfilled or they don't have any sort of buy-in, what's happening is turnover is astronomical, right? So at a ground level, I'd say they're having their own dramas on the other side of the fence too. So I'd actually say the independently owned stores they're still the owner operator still is always the passion project, right? And the passion project always smokes the corporate, for I suppose the passion and impact piece and the motivation piece, and they'll always disproportionately serve customers above and beyond and all that sort of problem. So I guess whilst you have national scale, you also have local impact as your trade-off. So there's conversations are definitely different now, which is fun. And I guess there's a bit of business acumen behind it as well, which has changed as also. And I think there's a nice, I guess when you take a punt on I suppose, the worth of what you're offering the marketplace early on. And then over time, hopefully the market does confirm that it does have value. Yes. And then you go, okay, cool. Now I can, I suppose I don't need to beg for this anymore. I don't need to, and if it suits where the business is up to and it suits where I want it to go, and it's part of the vision, it will help execute that vision, then awesome. We'll have that conversation. But it's no longer, when you take away the desperation and took away all that debt-fueled need for every dollar, And now the conversation should be more so, well, is this actually a good idea? Does this actually benefit us? Are these sort of people I want to be aligned with? Do I want to do business with these people, or is this just a headache? That's become a luxury that you afford later on when you can decide who you do business with.
And so you're referring to that comparison of, asking for a gondola, giving a whole bunch of free product, and now you're in a stage where you're actually saying, hold on a second, my brand has walk-up demand to it, or it has value, or the formulations are better. So now when you're approaching those sort of big box retailers, you're actually moving from a point of strength. I imagine you're still wanting to massage the conversation however it needs to be massaged, but you aren't willing to, bet the farm on it, and you're certainly not willing to give away margin that's unnecessary.
Bingo, because that product would be better served in the hands of people who would represent it properly in an independent setting. Because I know, like in the really passionate sole trader-owned store, that guy's going to explain it with all the romance and all the great parts that separate that product from another one. That product that I would give to this store at, just basically give it away margin wise, would go to a very deserving home over in the independent store, who will then describe it to the people coming in and give it the full justice it deserves of what we're trying to do here and so on. So I make a decision now more so. I go, do I actually want to give away that much stock at this pricing? Because what's the point, right?
Yeah.
I would rather, would that stock be better? Because we're actually more so growing that much, trying to keep up with stock demand was our biggest problem. We've always been really running lean, trying to keep stock up, always selling out of things. So
controlling growth.
So for us, it's always been like, stock's precious, right? Like this stuff is what we're trying to help with. And if this stuff goes, well, we're all screwed. So I'm much more selective now. Who do I give this stock to? If I've only got so many units, where does that go? And I won't go begging and borrowing for it, because it's like, well, you'll just take it for granted and just see what your margin you can squeeze, and you'll put it there and be like, sweet, if it sells, it sells. Whereas the other guy will go in and go, oh, thank you. They're grateful for it. They love this. They know what it's going to do for the customers walking in. And then there are people who, like, it's a cult now, which is really cool. People who have used Restore and slept properly finally, dealing with stresses or people with PTSD or insomnia that actually sleep now and live by the stuff. Like, there's people that have had like life-changing stuff because of the formulations, and that's really, really hard to quantify when you sit down and say, can I get an extra 2% GP on there? I'm like, I'd rather not.
Yeah, and for anyone that's not in the supplement space, quite often when you hear people saying how life-changing some of the products are, you go, this is one of those blue moss products that are going to cure cancer on the market. I can actually say from a retail level, these Ayurvedic herbs that he's referring to, they really do produce real results for people. We've had things, as an example, of females that haven't got their period for 4 years, gone to an endocrinologist, really haven't actually achieved a result that they were hoping for, used a product which has correct dosing of Ayurvedic herbs, and have now restored normal menstruation function, menstrual function. And so they really are like actually changing people's lives for the better. I did actually just want to, now that's so much of a side quest, stay with it, people. This is a good part. So Will is a supplier to me. Understanding as a small independent what exactly Will is trying to achieve with his brand right now would give me the ability to say, hey, this is what you're trying to achieve. How do I help you achieve that to a greater degree? And my importance to you, a retailer, to a supplier, would grow if we could come to some sort of negotiation here. And I think that is something that a lot of small business owners don't do. We've had quite a few marketing clients where we've said, now that you have a following, now that you have the ability to produce content, have you asked your suppliers what do they need? Because they may not have an ability to produce this type of content. And it doesn't just have to be of a marketing influence. It's, well, where is your brand situated in the store? Or do you have an impulse buy right next to your counter? Have you asked your suppliers what you can do for them? Because that's another way of increasing your importance to the supplier that may translate to better margins, but it may just actually produce consistent supply. Because if Will's now saying that, well, we actually have such a growth going on in our business, we have to be careful with where we send stock. You may be one of those people that want to keep receiving stock. And so, reach out to your suppliers and ask the question, what is it that you can do for them? Often at a retail level, we forget that the suppliers have to come through retail most of the time to sell, unless they go direct to public, which is a whole nother conversation. But asking your suppliers what you can do for them is a real question, even if you're small, because if you've got Will that's trying to cause impact to people, I might not be able to place a $10,000 order weekly with him, but I might be able to participate in bringing impact to the customer base in a way which he is trying to achieve. And so sometimes when you haven't got people that are just trying to drive net profit, you can actually offer them something that they're valuing. And so it's a conversation that I think small business owners really do need to have with suppliers.
Good point, because it's still, business is just people. It's all a people game. So and you're right, and it does appeal to. I've got people who I go above and beyond for because I know they've got a congruent mission statement, and so there might be the smallest traders who order bugger all, but you're like, you know what, man, and they might be always late on their bills because they live week to week, but they're fighting the good fight, and you're like, you know what, man, I'd like to do what I can here to help you through that, man. Like, and it's nice, and I like to give them a call and have a catch up and just hear how it is doing that good fight all the time. And you're right, and I'll do usually disproportionate stuff for them. We'll sign off on deals, and because it's just there's someone out there trying to do the same sort of thing, and I'm like, awesome. I'm a bit of a soft spot for the underdog story nowadays as well myself, so I think that's a great one actually. And asking too, because there's a lot of assumption. You see this in marketing, right? Like a lot of people who are asking for ambassadorships or sponsorships as well, and it's a very one-sided equation typically. How much can you give me? They ever ask the question, this is what I can do for you. If someone came to you with a good, whether it's a staff member, an athlete, another business saying, this is how I could help you. It's a very different place to come from than going, what can I get from you?
and a completely acceptable conversation to have. But I'm not sure you would obviously have a lot more businesses be reaching out to you because of where you sit in the value chain. But surely I wouldn't think that many people are actually asking you that question. I would have thought they only assume all they've got to offer is dollars to you.
Yeah, which is, and I guess probably a byproduct of me not really building personal brand a great deal. I'm not much of a socials fan, so I've never really if I'd put out my mission statement earlier on and put out more of my backstory and where I'd come from, they probably would know that they could appeal to that side of me and it would work, So it's probably all off my own back, and that hardly anyone knows what I got here for. I made that reflection. God, it was only last week, maybe the week before. I went on leave. I finally I took some leave and finally had a breather in the madness and I reflected that most of my staff had been here now the longest so it was about 12 months. And so a lot of people who were there in the early days, have sort of either moved on, had other opportunities or whatever's, gone on. And it was quite interesting to see. I suppose none of them knew it for what it was, and they sort of all walked in at this level, and they've all walked in seeing it with a business with staff and resources and, sales and everything's doing what it's doing. And it's funny when people haven't heard the backstory of where it came from, or us living in the warehouse because we didn't have a home and all this sort of stuff. Like you forget, it was just funny. So I guess, and you're right. Like when you view things from the outside in, you'll see this almost every business. You see a successful business, and that just is your perception of that business. And then but if you knew where they'd come from, you'd probably be able to have a much more in-depth conversation about what they actually value. But it's
constructive conversation,
constructive one. Like that's a great way to start it, I think, as well. And I think that's, you can see it play out at different scales. I think when you get, and it's quite funny because I'm seeing it now, the necessity to put in. So I always try to, it became a mission statement to fight the corporate vibe. I didn't want to have a corporate feel in the business. I wanted to keep it very much about the mission, keep it personal, keep everything as real grassroots. And like I still I'm doing taste testings, I'm doing seminars, I'm doing stuff in person, I'm in stores every day myself. So I lead from within with the team. Like I'm in here too, guys. I'm in the trenches. I'm doing all this stuff with you. And so I try to fight the whole, Telstra feel. But it's funny too because I can see the logic as well as it grows, the necessity to as you scale, you have to put in systems, you have to have procedures, you have to have departments, heads of those departments, you have to build it. And it's unintentional but organic. And I'm starting to see how a company builds and why those corporate structures occur, because as I'm building it and I'm trying to write down, like only last week I just started writing down what would a company structure look like, and now with 11 staff and 8 years in is the first time I've done that before. And ironically it follows that thing where you go, I'd probably have this person, this would be overall management, and that'd probably be this would be the department, I guess you'd call it, and that'd be probably the head of that department, I guess you'd say, and they'd have people under them, I guess, and that would be, so I guess they're the head of that department. So you'd have a few department heads, and they'd probably report to a central managerial person, and they'd probably report to the top dog, and then and without even knowing it, you build a corporate structure without it at a necessity too. So I'm always in this like dichotomy going, as it gets bigger, the need for systems, procedures, and to corporatize it almost happens, because you go, well shit, you have to run like a big business. But then there's also like this real grassroots fighting of trying to...
How do you keep the heart coming down through the products?
How do you keep the heart through the product?
And so I guess that's where you may choose like a flatter design of a hierarchical system where you stay closer to each of the people that are most representing your brand. But I do think the challenge is as you look to increase efficiency so you can impact more people, how do you make sure that you don't lose impact? It's a real interesting thing. I don't think we'll need to ever deal with that sort of situation, because I don't think we'll look to be a part of those type of businesses? Because I think it comes back to what you said,
What it demands of you.
what it demands of you. I think we're acutely aware of it.
Good. So you should be, because I wasn't. I think probably a good thing, because if I told younger self what was going to be involved, if I went younger Will,
Probably wouldn't have done it.
it wouldn't have done it, right? So I think it's probably a good thing that we're almost like we're sprinting into the darkness sort of thing, not knowing what's on the other side of it. Because if you did, you might back out. But now you have the fortune of going, I know what's involved in the scale of a bigger business, and I'm starting to look backwards with retrospect, going, okay, interesting. This is now looking forward. So when I talk about the international conversations and growing revenue and growing the company and how many staff that requires and what structure and how much inventory and therefore how much capital and all that sort of stuff you do, you go,
But I do think you are uniquely positioned because you spent time at retail and you are still visiting retailers. So I think as long as that remains some part of your, I guess, yearly activities, I think you will be better positioned than others to not lose that impact.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Just because we're, I guess, probably running slightly over time. Yeah, and hopefully we can catch up another time and I guess delve into some more granular parts of the business. But was there anything else that you wanted to add? Maybe what's next for Primer, or we can leave that completely up to a new episode?
That's a fun one. No, I think what I've got here is I just put out Everyday Defense as my newest launch, and what it did is it was part 2 of the Everyday series, and that's meant to be a series, and I guess it all ties in a neat little bow. Most of the stuff we've been talking about purpose and mission and vision and values and everything. And I think very few times you get the opportunity to, I suppose, do something that's it's not quite a legacy piece because I'm still here, obviously, but I suppose like do something unique that's going to be the first time it's been done, and do something. And I suppose I want to, I guess, looking down the barrel, what that's going to look like. I've got a big vision for this thing where I want to make, eventually, I hope, next time we do the part 2, there'll be definitely more parts of it there, but have something where it's shaping the health of people throughout their day on a daily occurrence on this ever-growing scale. And I can help put things in place that optimizes people's health every day on a big scale and make that the ultimate, where we've got, I can have hundreds of thousands of people every day using things that will cover each aspect of their biology to ensure they're running optimally and give them optimal health, even if they don't know why it works. That's the other appealing part. You don't even need to know how it works. Just take it, you'll be healthier. And doing that is a really satisfying thing that I intend to make as the next little parts. When you say, what are you going to see next from us? I'm going to beef out this Everyday series and really make that the legacy piece, where it's like, here's something completely new, no one's really thought of, where I'm going to build out different parts of biology throughout the day in a series of things, and build with that overarching mission statement of going, this will every day to hundreds of thousands of people impact health. And that's the big sort of what we're marching towards, the North Star right now. So
what will Everyday Defense do for people?
That one's going to be, that's the internal. So that's the system support. That's the life support angle of it. So I've always done the Everyday Health is the first part of that. So I did that with all the micronutrients you require, the gut focus, the immune function focus, and those sort of things, and covering bases, I suppose. And then the next, and then this thing here was more so the other internals, like liver function, kidney function, oxidative stress, antioxidant potential, and dampening inflammation internally as well, because all those chronic stress and how insanely we build life, inflammation's a thing that we want to be looking at, and oxidative stress is a thing as well we want to be looking at. So I guess looking at like the internals more so. So yeah, definitely system support, and really, I'd probably say system support's the best word for it. It's trying to support the internal world to make sure we're looking after oxidative stress and inflammation and how organs function, and make sure they're functioning optimally, and detoxification works. And it's made to stack beautifully with Everyday Health to really drive detoxification. Because I used to be a bit of a purist, and I would hope that you could just eliminate everything, all your BPAs and plastics and soys and everything you could cut out, and all the EMFs and all the problems, right? But we live in a chemical bath, right? Like the average consumer, they did a 11,000 person survey in 2017 over in the States, and they had the average female consumer was exposed to 231 chemicals in a 7-day period.
These are xenoestrogens, or
these were just chemicals in total. So 231 chemicals in total, and that was across and I suppose, so what they realized with those was when went through it. And it was a mix of, because when you look at, if you're using cosmetic products, foundations, lip liner, with household cleaning products as well, with daily hygiene products, all these sort of things. And you read the back of, hell, just look at the back of a shampoo bottle. There might be 20, 30 ingredients, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought it was pretty unreasonable, but what it made me realize is I can't just say to people, avoid environmental burden, because it's not really possible, right? So detoxification has become a huge focus of mine. And this is the thing that really bolstered that. This goes with the other one and just drives detoxification, because we can't eliminate things going in, but we can speed it up getting out.
Beautiful.
So that'll sort of do that part of that really nicely. So detox will be a massive focus there and plug in quite nicely with the first part. And they'll all beef out and eventually be this really cool thing that they all talk and they all work together and make this nice little puzzle, nice little symphony of different herbs and nutrients and things that drive different parts of your biology to help you keep up with how inundated with stress and stimulus and burden and things that come at us each day, So
that's excellent. I really like that. Yeah, it's a unique approach. And I think it really is doing good for people. So that's awesome. We might just wrap it up there. But a pleasure to have you on, and thanks for spending your time with us. And we look forward to connecting with you later.